The bell over the restaurant door clicked shut behind me as I stepped inside, brushing the evening chill from my sleeves. I was only there to pick up the meal my son insisted on ordering for me, something he said would save me the trouble of cooking after a long day. I gave the cashier my name and waited near the counter, listening to the distant clatter of pans from the kitchen. Nothing felt unusual until the swinging door cracked open and the cook leaned halfway out, scanning the room like he expected someone to be watching him. He spotted me and stepped fully into view, wiping his hands on his apron as he approached. There was a tightness in his posture that didn't match the warm smell of food drifting from the back. When he stopped in front of me, he lowered his voice to barely more than breath. "Do not eat what he brought." The sentence landed so sharply that for a moment, the sounds of the restaurant faded behind it. He didn't blink. He didn't soften his tone. He just waited for me to understand the weight behind those 6 words. I felt myself freeze, caught between confusion and something heavier. His eyes held a seriousness that didn't belong in a place that served takeout. I didn't ask him to explain. I could tell he didn't intend to offer details. Instead, he glanced past my shoulder to make sure no one else was listening before raising one hand slightly and pointing toward a sealed container sitting on a side counter. A small note was taped to it, written in handwriting that wasn't the restaurant's. He moved just enough for me to see the corner of a packet tucked beneath the tape. It looked like a spice blend, the kind someone might bring from home. The cook didn't touch it. He didn't step any closer. He simply shook his head once, slow and firm, as if warning me about fire I couldn't yet see. My name was called from the cashier, and he stepped back quickly, returning to the kitchen without another word. I walked to the counter and took the bag the cashier handed me. The container sat heavier in my hand than its weight should have allowed. I felt the shape of the taped packet through the thin plastic, and the cook's voice replayed in my mind, plain, sharp, unadorned. I looked toward the kitchen door again, but it had already swung shut. The moment was gone, replaced by the ordinary hum of customers waiting for their order. But the warning stayed. Something about the food my son arranged for me wasn't just unusual. It was intentional. I sat at the table that night with the untouched takeout container in front of me, feeling the quiet of the house settle around my shoulders. I wasn't ready to open it, and I didn't need the cook's warning replaying in my mind to justify the hesitation. The dizziness I'd been dealing with over the past month made me cautious about everything, and it was that same dizziness that had pushed my son to step up, as he called it. He said he wanted to help, until I felt steady again. Back then, it sounded like support. It didn't take long for that support to come with boundaries I hadn't agreed to. He told me cooking alone wasn't safe anymore, that I might slip or forget something on the stove. The first few times, I accepted the meals he prepared without thinking much about it. But the pattern grew thicker. Soon he was choosing every dish, every ingredient, and every delivery. The groceries I tried to buy for myself were pushed aside or replaced with items he said were better for me. It was subtle enough to pass as care, but firm enough that I felt the shift. I noticed he started hovering when I checked the fridge, offering explanations for why something was missing before I could ask. Even my medication reminders, which I had managed for years without error, became something he insisted on handling. He would pull the pill organizer toward him, check the compartments, and nod like a supervisor reviewing someone's work. Each time, the part of me that wanted to stay polite wrestled with the part that felt quietly boxed in. He always framed it as protection. Protection from falls. Protection from mistakes. Protection from a world he claimed was too quick for someone my age. The words were soft, but the control behind them wasn't. I began noticing how often he used the word should when talking about my routine. I should rest more. I should avoid cooking. I should let him take care of the details. Then, a small moment shifted the air. My daughter-in-law mentioned something about my eating habits, something I had only thought about privately, never spoken aloud. She brought it up casually, as if it were a harmless comment, but it pressed on me harder than anything else that week. Someone had been sharing more than updates. Someone was passing along things that belonged only to me. I sat back in my chair, feeling the edges of my privacy tighten in ways I didn't yet understand. The cook's warning, my son's control, the repeated reminders, it all pressed together, like pieces of a picture still forming. The space around my food and health wasn't just crowded, it was closing in. The container sat untouched on the counter, but my mind drifted back to the meal my son brought me the day before. I remembered taking a few bites, expecting the usual mild flavor he preferred. Instead, a strange bitterness coated my tongue, sharp enough that I paused mid-chew. I pushed the thought aside then, blaming my own taste buds or the lingering dizziness. By the time the lightheadedness washed over me later that evening, I had convinced myself it was just age catching up with me again. The memory felt different now. I walked to the trash bin and lifted the lid, searching through yesterday's waste with slow, careful movements. A small packet sat near the bottom, torn open, its labels smudged. The handwriting scribbled across the front wasn't from any restaurant. It didn't match the neat, printed labels they always used. This one looked rushed, like someone scrolling directions in a hurry. I held it between my fingers, feeling the faint grit of whatever powder it once held. When I asked my son about the seasoning yesterday, he explained it away with a smile that didn't fully reach his eyes. He said the restaurant had switched to a new blend, something they were testing for regular customers. The answer had slipped out too quickly, almost as if he had practiced it. At the time, I let it pass. Now, standing over the trash with the packet in hand, the explanation felt thin enough to tear. I picked up the phone and called the restaurant, keeping my voice even as I asked a simple question. The staff member on the line told me they never accept outside ingredients, not from customers, not from suppliers, not from anyone. Her tone carried the certainty of someone repeating a strict policy. When I thanked her and ended the call, the quiet in the kitchen settled heavier than before. Later that afternoon, my son walked in and headed straight for the pantry without a greeting. He scanned the shelves before telling me that some of the items weren't good for me anymore. He didn't specify why. He didn't ask if I agreed. He just noted what he planned to remove next time. I watched him from the doorway, seeing how his eyes lingered on the foods he disliked and skipped over the ones he had chosen himself. A subtle alarm began to build, a quiet pressure beneath the surface. There was something intentional in the way he managed my meals, something hidden in the small details I had brushed aside. The bitterness from yesterday no longer felt like a mistake. It felt like a sign I had been too willing to ignore. I drove back to the restaurant the next morning, keeping my steps slow as I entered. The same cook who warned me looked up from the counter, surprise flickering across his face when he recognized me. I didn't ask him anything at first. I just set the untouched container on the counter and waited. He seemed to understand why I had returned before I spoke a word. When the lunch crowd thinned, he motioned for me to follow him to a side area near the prep station. He reached into a small folder tucked beside the register and pulled out a slip of paper. "Your son dropped this off," he whispered, keeping his voice low. The note was written in handwriting I knew too well. Tight letters, numbers grouped like instructions. It described adding a specific amount of extra flavoring only to my portion. There was no mention of taste, only measurements, the kind people use when they want something precise. I traced the ink with my eyes, feeling the quiet dread settle deeper. This wasn't a generic request. It was tailored, deliberate, and hidden behind a casual phrase. The cook didn't offer guesses. He didn't need to. The details were already loud enough. The manager stepped over when she noticed us. She confirmed that my son had come in earlier that week asking about meal consistency for someone with memory issues. Her tone held confusion. She had no reason to doubt him then. I didn't correct her. I simply nodded and thanked her, letting her return to her staff while I folded the note and placed it inside my jacket. At home, I walked into the hallway cabinet where my son kept a few of his own items. I didn't intend to search it, but the thought nudged me forward. A small space in the corner looked emptier than before, as if something had been removed recently. A faint imprint of dust marked where a vial or packet once sat. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it belonged to him. I stood in the doorway, absorbing the small pieces that had been scattered around me for days. The bitter taste, the odd instructions, the cook's warning, the altered meals, the missing item from the cabinet. Each detail was separate until now. Together, they formed something clearer, something I could no longer explain away with age or coincidence. The pattern wasn't accidental. It wasn't protective. It was controlled, and it was aimed squarely at me. I slipped the folded note in the empty space in the cabinet out of my mind long enough to drive to the small clinic near the pharmacy. I didn't call ahead. I didn't tell my son I was leaving. I simply walked in with the packet I'd taken from the trash and asked to speak with someone privately. The nurse on duty recognized me from past visits and guided me into a small consultation room without asking many questions. When I placed the torn packet on the table, she examined it with a careful, practiced eye. She didn't comment on its appearance. She just opened a drawer, pulled out a small testing strip, and dabbed a trace of the remaining powder. The strip darkened almost immediately, turning a muted shade that made her expression tighten. She set it down gently, as if the color itself carried weight. "This looks like something used to calm the system," she said quietly. "A sedative-type blend, very mild on its own, when added repeatedly." Her voice slowed as she measured her words. "It can cause dizziness, confusion, slower reflexes. Some people would have trouble standing too quickly." She didn't say the word I was thinking, falls. She didn't need to. She asked where I found it. I told her only that it came from food given to me, nothing more. She nodded as if she already sensed I didn't want to elaborate. Then she mentioned something that added a deeper coldness to the room. "Your son was here last week. He asked about ways to help you remember your doses. He wanted to know if certain supplements could be mixed with meals for easier use." She paused. "He said you'd been forgetting things." I kept my hand still in my lap. I didn't react outwardly, but inside, pieces of the past weeks rearranged into a shape I could no longer ignore. The bitter taste, the sudden fatigue, the dizziness I blamed on age. None of it had been random. None of it had been mine to explain away. She handed the packet back to me, wrapped now in a small evidence sleeve she offered without question. "I can't say exactly what the full mixture was," she added, "but what I tested shouldn't be given without medical supervision, especially not to someone your age." I thanked her, stood, and walked out through the quiet hallway with the packet tucked inside my coat. Each step felt heavier, not from fear alone, but from clarity settling into place. The episodes I'd chalked up to aging weren't natural. They were guided, and someone close to me wanted that guidance to continue. I took the evidence sleeve straight to my doctor, asking for a few minutes without scheduling, and he made space as soon as he saw my face. I placed the packet on his desk and told him only what mattered, that a nurse had identified sedative traces. He opened the sleeve, studied the powder, and compared the nurse's notes with my recent visit record. His jaw tightened in a way I had never seen before. He ran a quick match check on his computer, cross-referencing typical sedatives with the dosage estimations the nurse had given me. When the results aligned, he leaned back in his chair and spoke with the calm precision of someone trying not to alarm a patient. "This isn't an accident," he said. "Someone is trying to weaken your stability." The words were simple, direct, and final. There was no room left for softer explanations. He handed the packet back and told me to avoid any food or medication. I hadn't prepared myself. He didn't ask who might be responsible. He didn't press. He just handed me a printed set of emergency guidelines and said I should call immediately if the dizziness returned. His tone made it clear he believed it wouldn't happen naturally. Back home, the hallway felt too quiet as I walked toward my son's room. I didn't intend to search anything, but the door was cracked open, and a stack of papers sat on his desk. One form sat on top, "Evaluation for Cognitive Decline," with my name written neatly on the first line. I stared at it without touching it. The date showed it had been printed 2 weeks earlier. Beside it was a call log on his tablet, left open and unprotected. One entry stood out, a call to a care facility I recognized. Under the notes section, a line read, "Guardianship requirements requested." The timestamp placed it on a morning he had insisted I stay home to rest. I scrolled once more and saw another entry, weeks old, showing he had requested a copy of my medical record. I set the tablet down, leaving everything exactly where it was. The shape of his plan was no longer guesswork. It was organized, documented, timed. Each step carefully arranged to make me dependent enough to justify taking control. I walked through the house methodically, securing my medication in a locked drawer, collecting my documents and placing them in a bag only I had access to. I checked the window latches, the cabinet locks, the pantry shelves he liked to rearrange. Each task steadied my breathing, anchoring me to the reality I could no longer avoid. This wasn't about meals or reminders. Someone close to me had built a path toward my incapacitation, and if I didn't act now, I might not be able to act at all. I called my lawyer from the car, keeping my voice steady as I explained what I had found. Every note, every test result, every form with my name on it. He didn't interrupt. He only asked me to come by before the end of the day. When I arrived, he listened again, this time with the documents spread across his desk in careful rows. He tapped one finger against the packet in its evidence sleeve and nodded slowly. "Record everything," he said. "Document every step. Do not mention what you know until you have it all on paper." His certainty anchored something in me. When I returned home, the kitchen lights were already on. My son stood at the counter, staring into a pot like he was analyzing the contents instead of cooking. He glanced at me, then immediately asked if I had eaten. His tone was too quick, too rehearsed. He lifted the lid again, as if checking something for accuracy rather than flavor. The hovering had grown sharper in the days since the clinic visit, and now every movement felt like surveillance masked as care. I walked past him and slipped into the dining room. Bending slowly, I fixed a small recorder beneath the table where he wouldn't look. My hands didn't shake. The lawyer's words carried enough weight to steady me. I checked the placement once more before straightening up, letting the silence of the room absorb the moment. In my bedroom, I laid everything out on the bed: photos of the packet, screenshots from the clinic, the note the cook had shown me, copies of the medical forms my son had been collecting. I placed each item into a folder with careful order, not rushing the task. Every page was a piece of the line he had crossed, and together, they formed proof no one would be able to dismiss. Before going to sleep, I prepared a meal for myself and sealed it in a separate container. I set it inside the fridge where I could reach it easily in the morning, away from anything my son might bring. The simple act of separating my food from his made the house feel different, less safe, but more under my control. Later, as he walked past my room, he paused in the hallway. I could feel his eyes on the door, even though he didn't speak. When he finally moved on, I stepped into the living room and called out to him. I kept my tone casual, light enough to pass as routine. "Let's eat together tomorrow," I said. He agreed too quickly, and the air between us tightened just a little more. The next morning, I sat at the dining table with the folder resting beside my untouched plate. My son arrived a few minutes later, carrying a warm container, setting it down with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. I watched him settle into the chair across from me, waiting until the silence grew heavy enough to hold what needed to be said. "I want to ask you something," I said calmly. "What exactly have you been adding to my meals?" His smile froze, the muscles around his jaw tightening. "What are you talking about? It's just food. You know that." The tone was dismissive, but his eyes flicked toward the kitchen, as if checking whether someone might overhear. I kept my voice steady. "The seasoning packet, the instructions you left at the restaurant." His posture stiffened. They showed me the note. "It's your handwriting." A flash of something sharp crossed his face. "They misunderstood," he snapped. "You're confused again. That's why I'm helping." I reached into the folder and laid the cook's note on the table. His eyes dropped to it, then shot back up at me with a mix of anger and calculation. I added the evidence sleeve containing the residue, then the printed forms from his drawer, then the call logs. His breathing quickened, and the veneer of patience thinned into something jagged. Without warning, he lunged forward and snatched for the vial. I moved my hand back, and his fingers scraped the table instead. The sudden motion tipped the folder, scattering a few papers onto the floor. He pushed his chair back so hard that it struck the wall behind him. "You don't understand," he hissed, stepping toward me. "You need structure. You need someone to manage things before you hurt yourself." His words were tight, frantic, spilling out in a way he didn't intend to reveal. I stood slowly, keeping the table between us. His arm shot out, blocking my path toward the hallway. For a brief second, the distance between us felt dangerous. His breath hard, his stance rigid, his intention unmistakable. The recorder beneath the table captured every word, every shift in his tone. "You're not capable on your own," he said, voice rising. "Someone has to take control." I took a single step back, never raising my voice. "I think you've taken enough." At that moment, the front door opened. My lawyer entered first, followed by two authorities who had been waiting outside. My son's expression flickered. Shock, then rage, then something hollow. He didn't move when they approached. I stepped aside, letting the officers pass. The truth had finally shown its face. The house felt different in the weeks that followed. Not warmer, not brighter, just honest in a way it hadn't been for months. I stood in my own kitchen again, chopping vegetables at my own pace, the knife steady in my hand. There was comfort in the simple rhythm of preparing a meal without someone hovering behind me, checking pots, adjusting ingredients, or insisting I sit down. The quiet belonged to me again, and I moved through it with a steadiness I hadn't realized I'd missed. I handled my medications myself, sorting them openly at the table the way I used to. No one reached over my shoulder to remind me or asked if I was sure about the dosage. The clarity in my mind felt cleaner now that I knew what had been slipping into my food. Each day brought back more of the balance I thought age had taken from me. It hadn't. Someone else had been chipping at it quietly. As I returned to my routines, I found myself thinking about how control often enters wearing the face of care. It doesn't start with threats. It begins with suggestions, with small adjustments, with someone saying they just want what's best. Help becomes supervision. Supervision becomes restriction. Restriction becomes authority. And by the time you feel the weight of it, the walls have already moved in around you. I started speaking more openly to other men my age, at the clinic, at the bank, even in line at the market. I told them to check their food, guard their medications, and question sudden bursts of support that take away more than they give. I didn't share my story. I didn't need to. The advice stood strong without explanation. You don't have to wait for danger to show its face before you protect yourself. My doctor and lawyer helped finalize the last of the safeguards. Medical directives, account protections, and documentation were all placed in order. Not out of fear, but out of respect for the life I still intend to live on my own terms. They didn't offer apologies for what had happened, and I didn't look for any. What mattered was the structure they helped me build. For myself, not for anyone else. In the evenings, I cooked small meals and let the steam warm the air as I set the table for one. The quiet wasn't lonely. It was steady, fair, and mine. Each bite reminded me that autonomy isn't something you protect once. It's something you guard every day, especially when people believe age makes you easy to shape. I didn't regain trust. I regained authority over my own life. Growing old isn't the danger. Trusting the wrong person is.